Bildung, culture. When the section I am reading is titled Bildung, culture, and this section is made a subsection of the guiding concepts of humanism, this creates the desire for me to read this section through the question, how is Bildung one of the guiding concepts of humanism? Of course, the section Bildung, culture is not only a subsection of the guiding concepts of humanism. The section B, the guiding concepts of humanism, is a subsection of the significance of the humanist tradition for the human sciences, which is a subsection of 1, transcending the aesthetic dimension, which is a subsection of part 1. The question of truth as it emerges in the experience of art, which is a subcategory of truth and method. So, in this respect, when I read the section Bildung, culture, I could or possibly should ask, how is Bildung a guiding concept of humanism, and how is this part of the significance of the tradition of the human sciences, and how is this related to transcending the aesthetic dimension, as well as the question of truth as it emerges in the experience of art. And how does this help one better understand truth and method? And well, since I have asked all these latter questions, I might as well begin by exploring them. It seems safe to say that the section I, Bildung, culture, which does touch on all the, it seems safe to say that this section does touch on the topics that it claims to be a subsection of, though perhaps some kind of indirectly. In regards to the relationship of the significance of the human sciences, the main idea seems to be that the concept of Bildung seems to more accurately describe what the being of the human sciences has become. In relationship to how the concept of Bildung is to help one transcend the aesthetic dimension, it seems only right to say that Gadamer likes to focus on Helmholtz's description of the method of the human sciences as artistic. But what will one discover when they focus on Helmholtz's description of the human sciences? In the previous section, the translators write that in Helmholtz's famous speech of 1862, Between the Natural and the Human Sciences, he laid great emphasis on the superior and humane significance of the human sciences, yet he still gave the human sciences a negative logical description based on the methodological idea of the natural sciences. In the following sentence, it is written thus: Helmholtz distinguishes between two kinds of induction, logical and artistic instinctive induction. And a little further it reads, the practice of induction in the human sciences is tied to a particular logical condition and requires a kind of tact and other intellectual capacities of, well, e.g. a well-stocked memory and the acceptance of authorities. Relatedly, in the following chapter it reads, what Helmholtz calls tact includes Bildung and is a function of both aesthetic and historical being. In context, this seems to indicate that it was in Helmholtz's famous 1862 speech that the growing conscious awareness of the relationship between aesthetics and the human sciences emerged. Part of this emergence brought about by Gadamer's horizon fusing with Helmholtz and the translator's horizon fusing with Gadamer's and my horizon fusing with the translation interpretation called Truth and Method, is that one of the chief characteristics of the artistic method of the human sciences is that it has a sort of tact, and that this tact is governed by the concept of Bildung. Thus, the relationship between aesthetics and the concept of Bildung seems to be linked together by the idea of tact. With at least one of the questions raised beginning to be addressed, how about the others? Though it does seem right to ask how is Bildung one of the guiding concepts of humanism, it still is unclear exactly what humanism is according to this text. Therefore, to give an adequate amount of time to pursuing the question how is Bildung one of the guiding concepts of humanism, it seems that the text ought to say something about humanism. While human science as well as humanism seems related in that the word human seems to be part of what lies at the basis of both, could it be said that the project of the human sciences is the project of humanism? And I'm not sure I really answer that question. Maybe I'm just raising it. It seems there should be a relationship there, but I'm not sure that a real direct connection is made, at least one that I can see from my horizon. Anyways, while this section, I build on culture, is a subsection of the significance of the human tradition for the human sciences, it seems right to think that this text would say something about the humanist tradition. Though in the previous section, the problem of method, it seems to not even mention the word humanist or humanism, the section we are now investigating does. It would be worth making a separate investigation into the way, quote, this is a quotation, it would be worth making a separate investigation into the way in which, since the days of humanism, criticism of scholastic science has made itself heard and how this criticism has changed with the changes of its opponent. But what does this say about the humanist tradition, and more importantly, the relationship of Bildung as a key concept of it? In interpreting what has just been quoted, it seems right to say that the historical characteristic of the humanist tradition, which seems to have been appropriated into the spirit of the current human sciences and their historical emergence, is its criticism of the scholastic science. Now, whether or not scholastic science has any similarity to the natural sciences in a way that could be somewhat seen as a parallel to the current issues Gadamer's raises is questionable. Nevertheless, as one continues to read the seeming first explicit mention of the humanist tradition, it is found that the translators seem to think that Gadamer sees the current tension of the humanist tradition and the methodological idea of the natural sciences as an outgrowth of early humanist writings like Plato's Critique of Sophism and Plato's peculiar ambivalent attitude towards isocrats. And it seems to be claimed that this tension created more urgency to overcome the problematic essence of the methodological idea of the natural sciences for the human sciences, when the methodological idea, after its growth in the 17th century, asserted its ideal as exclusive. I would guess that this exclusiveness is an exclusivity towards what is valued as knowledge by the natural philosopher, and indirectly perhaps towards the human scientists as well, some of them at least. But now the question is, what is the humanist tradition according to this text? Now that the question, what is the humanist tradition according to this text, has begun to be explored, how does this section, Build on Culture, answer the question, how is Bildung one of the guiding concepts of humanism? Gadamer's argument seems to be that Bildung is a concept that lies at the basis of how the human sciences work. More specifically, Gadamer seems to be claiming that Helmholtz described the methodology of the human science as possessed with the quality of artistic and tact. A couple passages will make this clear. First, the text says that the way that Helmholtz describes how the human sciences work, especially what he calls artistic feeling and tact, is in fact presupposes this element of Bildung. Secondly, the tact of which Helmholtz speaks is not simply identical with this phenomena of matters and customs. Thirdly, what Helmholtz, and these are all quotations that I'm reading, in each one of them, it's very explicitly saying that Helmholtz is calling this characteristic of the human sciences tact. So there's 1, 2, 3. And thirdly, what Helmholtz calls tact includes Bildung and its function to both aesthetic and historical being. From these three above passages, it is now clear that this text seems to claim that Helmholtz calls, or at least uses, the idea of tact as a way to describe the way in which the artistic method of the human sciences works. But this does seem a little inconsistent with what has previously been said about Helmholtz's relationship to tact in the previous section. For in the previous section, the concept of tact, as described above, was a word constituted by the fusion of horizon of Gadamer to Helmholtz through the fusion of horizons of translators of Gadamer, which I now read. In other words, while in the current section under review, this section claims that Helmholtz authored the idea of tact, in the previous chapter, it seems like the idea of tact in relationship to Helmholtz's ideas was the product of Gadamer's reflection on Helmholtz's work, and perhaps even more a contribution of the English translators of Gadamer's Worchiat method, and thus was the addition of Gadamer and not the addition of Helmholtz, which is, I think, is pretty significant. But what does my previous paragraph, what I've just said, have to do with the question, how is Bildung one of the guiding concepts of humanism? It only seems correct to speculate that Helmholtz is the linking key to understanding this mystery, or beginning understanding this question. It is Helmholtz, because it is Helmholtz that has been claimed to have stated, it is Helmholtz that is claimed to have stated that the method of the human sciences is artistic and functions with a kind of tact. And Gadamer's contribution seems to be that Bildung presupposes tact, which I take to mean that Bildung constitutes the foundation of tact. Thus, it seems that Gadamer's interpretation of Helmholtz is most significant in identifying what unifies the understanding of this section to the subsections it falls within. Or, as the translators of Gadamer put it, a reflection of the idea of Bildung, like that which lies at the basis of Helmholtz's thinking, leads us far back into the history of this concept. We must pursue this context a little if we want to liberate the problem of the human sciences from sciences present for philosophy from the artificial narrowness in which 19th century methodology was caught. Anyways, those are my ideas, and if you want to read along as I'm saying this or go over it, I'll put a link to my writing in this section. I think what I realized, what I'm really trying to do, as I've stated previously, is that, at least in the earlier videos, is I'm really trying to have my understanding of these sections in this reading of Gadamer's Truth and Method be unified with what the subsections are claiming this section to be about. In other words, you know, this section is a subcategory of many sections, and therefore it should say something about the relationship of it to these subsections. And I think what I found, at least in this, what was interesting to me, is that really Helmholtz is really significant for this, for understanding it in this unified way. That's basically what I realized. And anyways, have a good day.